So yeah, this is also an option. For protons, it's also interesting, but the problem is to optimize beams, you also need to calculate a lot of beams, which just makes it slow. Okay. So here we saw some change of the beams. I will soon come to the question that is waved at me. So what you see now is that just naturally we already kind of avoid the spinal cord, and we avoid it very well. There's almost no dose in here. What's a little bit an issue with this beam selected here is actually that it has to travel a very far distance to the patient. So we get a quite high entrance dose here, but maybe the optimizer will do something about this. If we could here, for example, we could now create a helper volume in a clinical system to reduce the entrance dose a bit for this beam. Yeah. There was a question here.
Yes, there is one more question. I don't think that you answered it, but there is a question about again optimization of the dose in a target for transmission of proton beams. So do we have this possibility?
I will try to read it once more myself. Optimize the dose for transmission proton beams. In principle, this is possible for protons, also possible within MATRAD. I know people that did it. So a transmission beam is nothing special. It's just like usually a beam that has only one energy layer. And this energy layer is high energy that is high enough to pass through the patient. Yeah. And so in MATRAD will not, with all the automatical stuff that you have here, MATRAD will not create transmission beams. It's just not in our standard workflows. But you can always do this. So again, just for the interested ones, if you go into protons, basically, if you go into the geometry that you generate, this is now for photons, but it's kind of similar for protons in case of transmission beams. Like basically, we just write the energy that we use for each beamlet into this matrix here. So you need to just hack this geometry a little bit. The geometry is in a way disconnected, the definition from the dose calculation. So when you just define a geometry with a lot of transmission beams manually in MATRAD, which works, it's not too difficult, then you can just calculate and optimize a transmission beam. I hope that answers the question. Good. So, yeah, transmission beams are interesting for Flash because you can then have very high doses. You can create very high intensity transmission beams. Sorry. So this is our photon treatment. And also already with the beam selection, we can do a little bit. So you have a photon set up. You can look at the dose volume histogram. It takes a little bit longer to compute because there are so many helper structures and those few weird structures. So you see these weird structures here that are the clips usually, which have only, which we can also turn off here, then they will not appear in the dose volume histogram. No, let's turn it off. Let's calculate the dose volume histogram as well. Maybe we have now more sensible points. Yes. So you see that actually this treatment plan is not too bad. Yeah, so it's actually not so difficult to plan this case. So we already get a good set. You could challenge yourself now, and we won't do this just for sake of time, like just tweaking so many objective functions for all the time doesn't make so much fun. So you could, for example, tweak a little bit to try to get the hard dose a little bit lower. Yeah. So the hard dose actually here looks not too bad, but you could still try to reduce the maximum dose a bit. It's kind of a challenging treatment in terms of hard maximum dose here because we are quite close. So the tumor here is really quite close to the heart. So you could try to balance this a little bit more. And one way to do this would be, for example, we do one of this and then we move on to protons. is to here add a new function. So you go to the heart here. So make sure that heart is selected. And then press plus, and then the heart objective will be added. Yeah. And then you can think a little bit about what the function could be. So there are a few available in MATLAB. There's equivalent uniform dose. I will not go into detail there. There's DVH-oriented functions and so on. But for simplicity, I will stick with the squared deviation, yeah, or the squared overdosing. So that's something good for OERs. I want to pull the dose down, organs at risks. And I say, okay, I have my, let's look at the dose volume histogram here. So I don't want to make like, that's why I kind of avoid a bit to make some clinical suggestion about hard doses, because I'm not a medical doctor. And if I now say that any hard dose makes sense, I don't want this to become someone's knowledge about hard doses. But in principle, you could look for a point here and say, I just want to reduce the hard dose. Yeah, I want to make it lower. And you see at the moment, it seems to be here, 3 gray per fraction is our prescribed dose. And maybe I just want to push it a little bit more of 1/3 to the prescribed dose, like here to this, like try to get it a little bit lower here. So what is 1 gray per fraction in 15 fractions? I think everybody should be able to do this math. Yeah, that's 15 gray. So I can say, let's pull it towards 15 gray of the whole treatment. Let's try to get it a little bit in this direction. Of course, the heart is probably more important than the rest of the body. Yeah, so I could change my penalties, my weights of the individual function contributions. I set this to 300, like maybe to 400 or something like this. Make it a little bit more important. And there's one thing I also change. It would also work, I think, when you do not change it. Remember these things here, we also need to decide on what overlaps what in our plan. So we know that the PTV is on priority 1. So it overlaps everything else for the planning. And then the heart should be priority 2 because it's our first organ at risk. And the skin, so the rest of the body, it's not the skin really, it's the rest of the body, should be 1 level below that. So I set it to 3. Okay. And now I could like continue. I can add another one. I could add the spinal cord, but at the moment it doesn't look like it needs a lot of protection because it's already protected. I could add the rest of the liver, for example, and so on. And they can usually then all live on this level 2 of importance because they don't overlap each other to begin with. But that's kind of how you can add sequentially functions. In clinical systems, you would usually kind of they will generate some set of functions for you based on the cases you did in the past, and then you can start from there. So you get a little bit more configuration. But if you really want to play around and see what you can add and what impact the individual functions have, that's a nice case to start with. So, and now we optimize this again, so it doesn't need recalculation. We should be just able to re-optimize. It takes a bit. And we take a look at what this newly added function does to our plan. Yeah, you always have to wait. Like in the beginning of treatment planning, computerized treatment planning in this way with optimization, this really took half a day, like not half a day, but maybe 2 hours or 1 hour just to optimize one plan. So planning was really, you put these functions together, you optimize, maybe you stop the optimization early. And now what happened, like just to go away from this anecdote, we just added this tiny heart objective, but it acts really strong and makes it very difficult to model this boundary here. Yeah, this boundary between heart and target. So you want a very low dose next to a high dose. And if you enforce this too much, this can really become difficult to solve for the optimizer. So what you see now, what happened is that kind of this one beam, like this one here, that models this boundary. Basically, it has the penumbra directly following this boundary will be used very heavily by the optimizer to try to get this gradient, this dose gradient from high to low dose as good as possible. Yeah. And I think now you start to understand a little bit why this process can be kind of annoying. Yeah, I just added one function that I think was a good idea, reduce dose in the heart, but everything you change in the treatment planning workflow in your like priorities or whatsoever will impact the treatment somewhere else. And like finding this is really a little bit a tedious thing. Nowadays, and it will probably also, so we have 2 experimental modules for that implemented, but they are not in a release and they will also not be in the next release. So you can do different optimization approaches. So there are approaches, for example, which take long for the initial computations. So you wait an hour, maybe, and then they give you a plan database. So instead of letting you do the tuning here, they just give you a set of combinations of these importances and parameters. And you can then, after this lengthy initial computation, use sliders to kind of move through the plans that the computer has generated. Makes it much more nice than, you know, like adding something and then figuring out my whole treatment is blown and I need to go back and I need to change something there and there and there, maybe add a new helper volume and so on and so on. So all of this tuning is really, really annoying, and a lot of research over the last, not over the last years, it's even like a little bit longer ago, has been gone into making this process as smooth as possible. Like you can really think, like from a physicist's point of view, this might be not that big of a problem because like someone can tune it, right? But if you're running a radio oncology department, and your planners spend their days on tweaking plans, anything that makes this faster is a very good investment because then you can treat much more patients with the same amount of planners or have fewer planners. So this is kind of where a lot of research went in the past, is kind of automating this tweaking process. It's still not perfect. You still need to do tweaking. But now you can do it nowadays in clinical systems quite fast. Same with the contouring question. Tedious tasks that have a solution can be automized in some form. All right. So I will not try to make this photon plan good. Like you can have this experience of tweaking a plan on your own a bit, like just try to make the plan without hotspots. There's also, if you go to this workflow one, that I showed you earlier, there's a very interesting or very difficult to achieve example, like it's kind of challenging to achieve this one here. Yeah, so you can try this on the prostate patient if you're interested to just play around a little bit. I just warn you, it can be frustrating. Yeah, so there is some experience and good education needed to do this like really smoothly. Okay, so that's about the photons. Let's now do the same thing with protons. Let's switch to the protons again and think about 2 good angles. So here we also finally have some geometry where it makes sense to think about angles. So you have 2 dominating organs at risk here, I would say. One is definitely the heart. That's like one of the dominating organs at risk. Very annoying, because it has this interface here with the tumor. Other annoying thing that we do not touch today is that it is moving. Heart is not something like moving that you can control during the treatment. Like breathing, you can tell the patient, breathe in, hold your breath, beam on, and beam turns off when you do tumor tracking, for example, when the tumor goes out of the window. But for a heart which is constantly beating, you cannot ask the patient, please control your heart. Little bit difficult. Yeah. So like not quite a challenging thing. You have, of course, the liver, which I think the best thing to do with the liver is a kind of parallel organ. It doesn't lose a function when something in it is damaged. I think your goal is to avoid just a general dose bath. So for now, we could ignore this in this educational setting. But the dominating organs are definitely in this region, avoiding this and avoiding this. So if you would now do a proton plan, the primary things to consider is not to shoot through the heart and not to shoot through the spinal cord. Yeah, it's basically directly important. Like you could leave this to the optimizer, but it would not make sense to create those in the spinal cord if you don't need it. So usually your beams would come here from the regions from 0, maybe like 10 could also be okay, 10, 20 degrees, counterclockwise to here this 180 degree. That would be your beam ranges where you would select beams from with protons, because they would stop, all of these beams would not kind of cross the heart and the spinal cord, and they will stop before that. Let's try this out a little bit. You can think about some beams. What will I do? I don't know. Let's take this one. Maybe one from, oops. I will go for 2 beams. As said, you also with protons, you don't need 5 beams. You can reduce your number of beams a bit. Go to something like maybe only 2 beams or maximum 3. I will go with 2. Do not forget to switch to protons. I sometimes forget that and I wonder what's going on. So I will do something like this. For now, I give everybody a little bit time to think about 2 beams or 3 beams or 1 beam. And when you have said that, you can calculate your dose matrix again. It will be okay. Also, never forget to set your couch angles to the same number as gantry angles if you have the same version as me. And it has not grayed out the couch angles. And then you click optimize again. There's a question in the chat I saw popping up. Is it important? What is going on? I can look at it now because I have to wait anyway.
I mean, the question is if there is a difference between
Yes.
maybe, yeah, you got this?
Someone clicked carbons already. So LEM, I will come to the LEM optimizer, LEM model and the optimization later. If you click carbons already, you might have seen that pop up, but we can discuss this in a few minutes. Okay. And this is now my proton treatment that I have. I guess for the rest of you, it might still be running a bit. Again, one thing you see, very nice low entrance dose. And it also seems to be a theme that tweaking and seems to be less required for protons, because you already have, due to the geometry and of patients and deep-seated tumors, and due to the characteristics that the deep dose is, that dose in depth is naturally high at the distal edge where the tumor is, due to the setup, you already just get much nicer doses to begin with. Like there's not so many trade-offs anymore that really annoy you throughout the treatment. Of course, there are like very difficult cases where this is still the way, but for standard treatments, the standard trade-off just between organ at risk and tumor gets so much more relaxed than in photons, at least in theory. I will show you a little bit of practical problems. Yes, if we look at the dose volume histogram here, it's also extremely nice. I don't know if you remember the heart dose. The photon heart dose earlier was somewhere here, and the heart dose is now here. Heart is basically completely spared just by switching to protons. We have very nice target doses, and so on. Okay. So that's how a proton plan looks like. Let's maybe do something that takes away the super magic of protons a little bit now. I always say, like as a kid, when I watched all these Spider-Man movies, there was always this sentence with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. And for protons, and particles, I usually say, with great precision comes great uncertainty. There's a problem, right? When you have like a dose that is super localized in depth, like, I create a proton beam and it goes into my patient and it stops at 10 centimeters of water equivalent thickness. Then you count on that when you irradiate the patient, that there is 10 centimeter of water equivalent thickness. Yeah? If there is not, because there is suddenly a little bit of more air in it or something that had air in it filled, then your peak where your doses will shift dramatically. So think about the nose. I'm a little bit, you hear it, I was got a little bit plain sick, so I had a little bit of a clogged nose. Now think about, I get an image of my head, super healthy. Someone plants proton beams through my nasal cavities. The nasal cavities are nice and empty. There's air in there. Yeah. So there's nothing stops, and my proton beam stops exactly in the tumor. Yeah. And then I come with a little bit of running nose to the treatment. Nasal cavities are filled. There is now liquid inside and weird stuff. And this actually has a water equivalent depth. So this is not air. So the proton spot will probably stop earlier now in relation. With photons have an exponential curve, yeah? So something fills, of course, this exponential curve will also slightly shift, yeah? So it will basically be a little bit steeper or shifted a little bit, yeah? But this is like tiny. This is like a little bit, the dose falls off a little bit earlier, and I will get a slight underdosage somewhere and a slight overdosage somewhere. And it will be compensated by beams coming from other angles, yeah? But for protons, this one beam will be shifted. Yeah, completely. And I have only 2 beams or maybe 3. So there is like a real problem or a substantial problem with uncertainties. Of course, things like a clogged nose, like doctor would see me and say, this might be an issue with our planned treatment. Please come back when you're healthy again. But if you think about something like like we have the liver here. So there's like some lung moving, like lung blowing up and like inflating and deflating. There is maybe something in the bowels just moved. Yeah, in prostate treatments, it's like could just be that there's gas in the rectum suddenly. There's kind of a gas bubble coming through. And these are things that you do not see live because you do not do live imaging. So uncertainty is a big thing, and we can kind of simulate something. We cannot simulate something real dramatic, like a lung moving at the moment, like loading 4D images would kind of blow up all our laptops, or doing robust optimization. Maybe I can do this later or try to show you. But what you can do is you can just simulate a shift of the patient. So let's say we position the patient wrongly. Yeah, so we go here, we misplace the isocenter, so we can change the coordinates of the isocenter here. Like changing the coordinates of the isocenter is like misplacing the patient, yeah?